Welcome to another sermon from the Lewes Church of Christ.
Good morning. I get the privilege to start out our Unbroken sermon series. It's going to be awesome. We're going to be walking through the life of a guy who's going to teach us how to thrive. I'm super excited about that. But as I was thinking about how to start this off, the question came to my mind: what makes a good story? You know, what makes a good story? Everyone loves a good story and around a campfire, reading a book. But what makes a good story? And I kind of narrowed down a few things. Every story starts off with a setting. You know, there's characters, they're in this place, and then something happens that kind of a directional event that kind of makes the story go. Like, where is this place? Where is this story headed? And then things happen. There's some rising tension, and then there's a climax, the bang of the story that leaves you with what happens next. I know when I say story, many of you go to your favorite movie or story, whatever, and it comes to your mind, and you remember the climax, the big part of the story. And the climax is really important. It's what happens to the character, what the character finds out to make him realize, I need to do something to make something right. And a lot of the times, a story has a theme behind it. Kind of telling us something that we need to know, we need to find out, we need to laugh at, and there's always a theme. And when I was thinking of a good story, the story Little Red Riding Hood popped up. Does everyone know the story of Little Red Riding Hood? And it's been a while. I don't even know why it popped up, but it did. And I was thinking about it, and I was going through the story, and I realized, why is this a kid's story? It's quite frightening. So, if you guys don't know who Little Red Riding Hood, she's a little girl wearing a little red hood. And so it starts off with her mother saying, hey, Grandma's sick. Can you take her some pies? She's, oh, yeah. So she's skipping through the forest, and she meets a wolf. Let me say that again. She's skipping through the forest, and she meets a wolf. Like, hello? And that's not the scary thing. The wolf starts talking to her. So, hey, little girl, where are you going? I don't know why he had a Sean Connery voice, but he asked her where's he going, and to our dismay, we find out that Little Red Riding Hood tells her where she's going. She's going to Grandma's house. So the wolf gets this sneaky idea to go wait for her because he's not really looking forward to the pies. He's looking forward to gobbling up Little Red Riding Hood. So the wolf gets there. He stuffs Grandma in a closet, and he dresses in Grandma clothes and waits for Little Red Riding Hood to come. She finally gets there, and immediately she notices some features that are wrong with Grandma. I mean, her hands are a bit hairy. When's the last time you shaved, Grandma? And her voice is really deep. So some things stick out. And the climax of this story is Grandma's not Grandma. The wolf jumps out, tries to get Little Red Riding Hood, but these wood choppers come and save the day, and happily ever after for Grandma and Little Red Riding Hood. So, thinking on that story, I was thinking, what's our story? You know, what's our climax? And I had to go back to the very beginning, Genesis 1. God is creating everything. He's creating the world. He's creating universe. And he creates the Garden of Eden. He creates man. And everything's perfect. But then, Genesis 3. We sin. Adam and Eve mess up and bring sin into the world. And that just leads on to 1,000 years of confusion and wandering for the Israelites, not knowing exactly what to do. But all these things lead up to Jesus. And he's our redemption. And through his death, burial, and resurrection, we can be saved. And that's awesome, but what happens next? What happens? We had creation, the fall, the tension, Jesus, but what are we doing? We're just waiting for his second coming. What happens next? And what do we do when we are like the Israelites, living in exile for however many years? And you know our 3-year theme is thrive. We want to thrive as a church, as a family, as Christians. But how can we? How can we thrive when we're just waiting? How can we personally thrive in Jesus when this world is so filled with suffering? How can we thrive when the climax of our story is cancer? Or grief or of lost loved one, or our kids are failing and it's reflecting our own failures. Maybe our lives are just so busy that we don't know what to do. I mean, how is it possible to thrive when we're stuck with debt or an unshaky future and just confused? Maybe we've lost everything and we're too afraid to start again. How can we thrive when we're stuck with suffering? The word exile I used earlier, the Israelites were wandering around for 1,000 years in exile. And that's kind of a scary word because it kind of seems like our country is running away from God. We are headed into exile, and times are changing. The word the term inner exile means to denote a foreigner in his own country. And it seems that Christians are outcasted in our country. And we know that this is not our home. Our citizenship is in heaven. And we know that Jesus says, if the world hates you, keep in mind that it hated me first. If you belong to the world, it would love you as its own. But you do not belong to this world. I have chosen you out of the world, so it hates you. But how do we thrive when we're so filled with suffering? Luckily, I know a guy who can help us out with that. He lived in exile all his life. He was kind of taken, and he lived to write about it. And his life is proof that we can thrive. His name is Daniel. And he is the ultimate story of Unbroken. He lived in the tension between the fall and the resolution. His life was crazy. The people of God were captured and taken into another land for 70 years, and it was crazy. But let's dive into the text. Daniel chapter 1, verse 1. I'm going to read that real fast. It says, in the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came into Jerusalem and besieged it. See, right there is kind of our setting. We have the king of Judah is taken over by Nebuchadnezzar. And I just want to pause at the word or the name Nebuchadnezzar. This is just an awesome name. And I don't know why parents, you guys gave up on that name. I mean, we should bring it back. Maybe my millennium will. But I tell you why you guys probably gave up on it. He was evil, he was wicked, he was brutal, and he was probably as bad as it gets. And this king, who's super dark, comes and takes over Judah. And he's a pretty bad dude, and I really don't think all the bad guys deserve super cool names, so I'm just going to call him Nebi for today. So when I say Nebi, I'm referring to King Nebuchadnezzar. All right, so I'm going to keep going through the text. Read Daniel 1 through 9. I don't know if it's all up there. I'll just go for it. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord delivered Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hands, along with some of the articles from the temple of God. These he carried off to the temple of his God in Babylonia, and put in the treasure house of his God. Then the king ordered Aphanaz, chief of his court officials, to bring into the king's service some of the Israelites from the royal family and the nobility. Young men without any physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude for every kind of learning, well-informed, quick to understanding, and qualified to serve in the king's palace. He was to teach them the language and the literature of the Babylonians. The king assigned them daily amount of food and wine to the king's table, and they were to be trained. For 3 years, and after that they were to enter into the king's service. Among those who were chosen were some from Judah: Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. The chief official gave them new names: to Daniel, Belshazzar; to Hananiah, Shadrach; to Mishael, Meshach; and to Azariah, Abednego. But Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal foods and wine, and he asked the chief official for permission not to defile himself in this way. Now God had caused the official to show favor and compassion to Daniel. Wow. I know that was a lot there, and a lot happened, but that is totally incredible. So we have King Nebuchadnezzar, and he takes over Judah. I mean, Israel is lost. And he also says to his chief officials, I want the best of the best. I want your best guys. I want the cream of the crop of the Israelites to come and serve me. I want the studs. I want the handsome ones. Those AP track kids who are on their scholarly way to life. The young teenagers who were just brilliant. And I just want you to step back for a minute and put yourself in their shoes. They were on the fast track to life. They were probably princes or royal family members. They were captains of the football team. And in a day, it crashed. Immediately, they're surrounded by an army and stripped from their family. They were kidnapped and all alone in a foreign country. I mean, their whole world literally radically changed. And it had to be devastating. Like in the movies, they're sitting there in the rain and nothing could get worse and their car blows up or something like that. It gets worse. They were kidnapped, stripped from their families, and now they had to serve the enemy. And along with that, they had to study a whole new life. They had to study astrology because all the wise men had to learn how to study the stars, the occult of black magic and sorcery, the religion of the Babylonians, and their whole new literature and language. They also had to deal with unclean foods. A big no-no in the Old Testament was to eat unclean foods because it was probably sacrificed to other gods. And so they had a choice to face. They either had to eat food that God directly commanded them not to eat or starve to death. There's no kosher delis in Babylon or Jewish delis for the guys at the men's retreat. But their lives changed. And not only did their lives change, but their names even changed. The word Daniel means God is my judge. Hananiah means Yahweh has been gracious. Mishael means who is like God. And Azariah means God has helped us. Those are awesome names. It's a heritage and a reminder that God is on our side. And the Babylonians hated that. They hated the reminder that the Almighty God is on their side. So they didn't just change their names to neutral names. They actually changed their names to please the gods of Babylonian. Belshazzar, the name given to Daniel, means may Bel protect you. Bel is Marduk, which is the great evil god of Babylonia. So his name basically means, may the god of evil protect you. That doesn't even, that doesn't sound right. And then Shadrach means belonging to the moon god. I just think about this for a minute. Your first name means belonging to Almighty God, creator of everything. He loves us, our Father. It created God, Son of God, to belonging to the moon god. I don't know how he lived with that one, but Meshach means who is like Aku, another god, and Abednego means servant of Nabu, god of wisdom. And it's interesting that you guys, or most people know Daniel's three friends, Shadrach and Benny, as their Babylonian names. And that's just because Daniel always referred to him as that, but Daniel is always mentioned from his original name, and he never forgot who he was. He held on tight to his identity, and he never let that go. But their lives were changed, their names were changed, and even their future was taken from them. The text hints at, in verse 3, the king ordered chief of his court officials to round up these guys, and the court officials in Hebrew is the word saris. And the word sarik means to castrate. And I'm not going to get into all that details, but that had to be devastating. These guys were 18, 19 years old, and they had their future taken from them. And one of the first things that happened to them was castration right there. And whew, I don't really want to think about it, but it happened. And, the king had to show him who's boss. These four guys walking around, they were the studs of their country. And I know what I'll do to them. Okay. Moving on, but that is so cruel. And there is no indication that these guys ever had a family or children, and now it's impossible for them, and which was really weird for any Jewish boy back then. So, just to recap, remember who these guys were. They were the AP scholars. They were the studs of their world. And they were kidnapped, taken from their families to a foreign land where they had no idea where they were. They were castrated, and they were forced to learn a new language, black magic. They were given unclean foods to eat, new names, and they were forced to serve the most wicked man on the planet. Now, I can imagine how these guys would kind of turn bitter. I mean, they had everything, and they went down to nothing. But they didn't sink into depression or bitterness. And this part's incredible. You might expect them to crumble, fall into addiction, maybe. I don't know, looking for an answer. They might turn into mean men and, go on Facebook or Twitter and rant about their horrible lives. I don't know. But they don't crumble, grumble, or even stumble. They had their life taken. Nebuchadnezzar just stripped them. They had their names taken. They had their choices taken. And they had their future taken. But oddly enough, they thrive. And there's proof to that. Daniel 1:18 through 21 says, sweet, it's up there. At the end of this time set by the king to bring them into his service, the chief official presented them to Nebi. The king talked with them, and he found none equal to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they entered the king's service. In every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king questioned them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters in the whole kingdom. And Daniel remained there until the first year of Cyrus. Look at verse 19. He found none equal. In fact, they were 10 times better than the cream of the crop. I don't know about you, but I'd say that's thriving. And in verse 21, Daniel says, in the place until King Cyrus. That's 70 years. He was living in exile, and he pushed through it for 70 years, and he thrived. And I'm pretty sure that's not the life he chose for himself, but God did choose it for him, and he thrived. And next week, Dad is going to tell you kind of how he did that. But in the meantime, I want to give you a challenge. And I'm almost done with done with high school, but I still have homework, so I'm going to give you a little bit of homework. I want you to figure out how he did it. I want you to read for yourself the entire book of Daniel. It's not that long, but I want you to find out how he did it. And God is going to reveal something to you. And when he does, pray about it. It's incredible. This whole story is mind-blowing. And maybe if he doesn't, pray about that too. Just, God, open my eyes to the story. But a few points that I want to mention that I think are super obvious from this text that Daniel stands on was number one, he resolved to the sovereignty of God. And this, in our life, I think, is super scary. Because a lot of the times we kind of get mad at God for this and that. But in this story, God actually allowed the Israelites to be taken captive. And honestly, that's super scary. But Daniel didn't panic. He allowed God to do what he needed to do. So he resolved and trusted the sovereignty of God. And number two, he resolved to surround himself with friends that would always point him to Jesus. Last week at Aftershock, we talked about brothers and how brothers always hold you accountable to not only your own standards, but to God's standards. And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego held each other to those standards. They always pointed each other back to God. The third thing I think is super obvious is he resolved not to be defiled by this world. I know one of my dad's prayers for me and my sister and my brother and my other brother is to not be gobbled up by the grossness of this world. And Daniel did that. He stood strong, and he pointed out that no matter what, God was in charge. And the last thing that he did, I think, is super, super important. He resolved to never forget who he was. Despite the turmoil, despite everything that happened to him in his terrible life, really, he held on tight to his identity. He knew that he was a child of God, and in that a warrior and a kingdom worker. And his friends, whose original name was stripped from them, he held on tight to Daniel. Blessing from God. And no matter what, he remained Daniel. So, in this series, Unbroken, I want you to dare to be a Daniel. I want you to resolve to be unbroken and desire to thrive.
This has been a presentation of the Lewes Church of Christ. We are located at 15183 Coastal Highway, Milton, Delaware, 3 miles north of Lewes on Highway 1. Our service times are 9 a.m. and 11 a.m. every Sunday morning.